Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we are joined by a very special guest, and that is PhD student Theodore Nash. Mr. Nash, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Nick. It's great to be here.
Now I want to talk about the Bronze Age collapse. How does the Bronze Age collapse affect Pylos?
Basically, it collapses it. The Pylos, all of the major palatial centers in Greece, with the possible exception of Athens, get burned down. We don't know why. We don't know by whom. One of the great questions is what is happening, and just political history. Politics and history are happening in ways that we can't see. People have suggested that we have big earthquakes, which is certainly possible. But the difficulty with an earthquake is that there's lots of earthquakes in Greece, and we can see their effects throughout the Bronze Age. More often than not, 95% of the time, if there's an earthquake, people rebuild. So just saying we had a bunch of earthquakes doesn't tell us why things didn't just keep going how they were. Because, if you have a strong society, you have an earthquake, a building falls over, you put it back up. So maybe earthquakes or something like this, natural disasters, exacerbated existing issues. It might be, the scholars have suggested that there was a period of drought, a period of difficulty, and so society was not able to deal with things like natural disasters in the way that it normally would. It was already weakened and susceptible to disruption. And then so it may have just been too many things stacking on top of each other. It seems like there were population movements in this point, which is understandable, right? If you're in Mycenaean Pylos and all of a sudden something happens and your palace is burned down, you can see why maybe that might not be where you want to live anymore. And if you and your whole village, the men in your village are like, ouchie, yeah, we're going to go try our luck on Cyprus, which seems to still be doing its thing. And so there is this idea of a sort of domino effect, where as regions get destabilized and collapse, people, refugees, mercenaries, people looking for a change, travel to new regions. They also disrupt those new regions, and this is sort of the sea people theory, which is really difficult. So we know that the king Ramses II of Egypt in the early 12th century fought off what he describes as a confederation of people from everywhere, and they were terrifying. They were tall as giants and had big fangs and really sharp swords, and only the great heroic pharaoh could actually defeat them. And wasn't it great that the accounts we have are royal propaganda? But people look at the names of the people that he says he defeated: the Ekwesh, which looks like Achaeans, the Sardinoi, which looks like Sardinians, the Sekelesh, I think, which looks like Sicilians. So people have suggested that this represents some kind of the Peliset, which looks like Philistines. So people have suggested that this is some kind of pan-Mediterranean group of roving wanderers who have their own lands have collapsed and they've come to try their chances in Egypt or something like this. And people have said, because this is really the one thing we can hang our hat on, right, is we have this big battle in Egypt with people who look like they may have been affected by collapse. And so people have suggested that these people are responsible for everything. The sea peoples they came along and they sacked Cyprus and they sacked Ugarit and they sacked the Hittite capital Hattusa somehow, even though it's nowhere near the sea. So even if there's a degree of truth in that, even if some of the people who may have really been more refugees than invaders that Ramses II was able to fight off, even if they were refugees from other disrupted regions, doesn't really tell us why those regions were disrupted. And it's very hard, it's very easy in some ways to assume that the one group of people we know who were responsible for conflict in this period were in fact responsible for all the conflicts. But it's very actually hard to defend that if someone asks, if you kind of sit back and think about it. So the idea that the sea people are in an unmotivated way, in any kind of simplistic way, responsible for the collapse doesn't hold up. So, this is not my personal area of expertise, but we don't know what happened, and we are not likely to know, because what happened came out of history. Historical forces, political forces came together and led to a series of burnt destructions on the Greek mainland. They led to an invasion of Egypt that may or may not be related. They led to destruction on Cyprus and in the Near East that, again, it's easier to assume that all of these things are related than not, but the chronology is not always easy too. So it seems like what happened is, over the space of 50 to 100 years, the whole region of the Eastern Mediterranean was destabilized. People were moving around, things were happening, cities were burning for reasons that we can't really reconstruct. And it's a long, some cities seem to have held out longer, some cities didn't hold out as long. Now, I was at a lecture last year where someone said, the chronology is really tough. It's really hard to synchronize all these destructions, which means we didn't have a collapse. And I said, well, if we have a period of 50 to 100 years with a whole lot of disruption and chaos and burning, isn't that sort of a more realistic narrative of collapse than just all of a sudden everything gets burned down? He said, no, if it doesn't happen at the same time, it can't be a collapse, which I think there's something to his argument that these things are hard to synchronize. But in fact, I think a long period of instability leading to a series of collapses, this isn't unlike what we would sort of talk about in the Western Roman Empire in the 5th and 6th centuries as things, there's no one simple, easy collapse of Rome. There's a whole lot of things that go wrong. There's the loss at Adrianople. There's the Gothic sack in 410. There's a whole, it keeps going. Collapse is never simple. And so coming back to Greece and to Pylos, the thing that people have hung their hat on in Greece, again, based on later myth, is this story of the Dorian invasion and the return of the children of Heracles. Now, one of the difficulties that anybody trying to reconstruct what happened faces is not dissimilar to something we spoke about before, and that is the linguistic situation before and after the collapse. Mycenaean Greek is it is not the ancestor of all forms of Greek spoken in later Greece. It is perhaps the ancestor of one of them, but it has changes in it already that rule out, it's already distinct from other dialects, and especially Doric. So Doric preserves some older sounds. Mycenaean Greek has already changed these, and they don't change back. So we know that Mycenaean Greek is being written, at least, presumably spoken, at Pylos, at Mycenae, at Knossos, at Thebes, in Laconia now, at Ias Vasilios, at Volos, everywhere where we have linear B, right? A lot of these regions, Crete and the whole Peloponnese, so Pylos and Mycenae and Tiryns and Argos and Medea, the whole Argolid, in the historical period, these are Doric-speaking regions. So when did the Dorians arrive? And how did they arrive? Is a question that we have to face. Now, the idea that at the end of the Bronze Age, these sort of northern Greek hill tribesmen came sweeping down into the Peloponnese and burned everything down and destroyed all the palaces is, you'd like it to be true because it fits with the myths, and it's a fun story, right? But it's just, this is not how we understand that populations moved in the ancient world. If you want to live somewhere, it makes much more sense to find a nice local girl and marry her, or vice versa, than to go and burn it down, right? Like, that's just, we have this notion of barbarians, which I think comes more from like Asterisk and Obelisk than from real history, because like people, this is the thing with the end of the Roman Empire too, right? The Goths want to be Roman. They want to be Romans. The Germanic tribes want in. That's what's happening. They don't want to burn it down. So the idea that these hill tribes who can't really speak Greek right came down and took everything over, burned things down while they were doing it, that they were responsible for it all is really tough. Now, were there population movements that led to Northern Greeks entering the Peloponnese? Probably. Were they already there as a lower class? This has been suggested. Just because we see one form of Greek being written doesn't mean that is the only form of Greek that was being spoken. The United States keeps its official records in English. That does not mean that there are people in America who do not speak English. And this is very clear in other regions, in other times. We know that most people in Asia Minor weren't speaking Hittite at a time when Hittite was being used to keep records. The Persians in the historical period were, they were keeping their records in Elamite, which is not the old Persian language, not related to the modern Persian language. So were they already there? Maybe. We don't know. And any narrative of simplistic invasion is going to be wrong. But we do know that the palace was sacked. We do know that the Thalos tombs were looted violently when they were excavated in the 50s. The bones were just scattered everywhere, and the excavator, writes in the publication that he can only assume that people who really did not like these people came in and dug up the burials and threw bones everywhere and violently despoiled these burials. So it has been suggested that the collapse in Greece is some kind of Marxist class revolution. The downtrodden Doric Dorians who are just really tired of all these palatial people telling them what to do, rise up and burn down the palace and sack the tombs and start speaking their own language freely again. Which, again, the trouble with all of this is that we have so few fixed points. We have a burnt palace. We have a changing linguistic situation. You're really only limited by your ingenuity when it comes to reconstructing the actual events that led to this. And, academics are clever people. There's no shortage of ingenuity when it comes to all of this. So in some things, I think it's best to step back and say, I don't know. And when it comes to the Bronze Age collapse, that might be the biggest one.
Theodore Nash, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It was great to chat.
To my subscribers, don't forget to check out the links in the video description below. It's going to take you to a variety of sources to where you can look at his work and really take advantage of all the awesome things that Mr. Nash has to offer. And I can't recommend it enough. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much and have a wonderful night.